You have no control over this.
I know, it's just horrible. All right. I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order for the special joint meeting of the City Council and the Finance Advisory Commission, or Committee. Ruth, roll call.
Morris,
Here.
Larson,
Here.
Smith,
Here.
Perkins, McAdams, Verbic,
Here.
Faber, Mayor Barnes,
Here.
5 present for City Council.
Ruth, would you, excuse me, Ms. Scott, would you please call the roll for the Financial Advisory Committee?
Babcock,
Here.
Briscoe,
Here.
McGill,
Here.
Neely,
Here.
Parch,
Here.
Tarazinski,
Here.
Washington. 6 present for the Finance Advisory Committee.
Excellent. Moving on to agenda item C, public participation. Do we have anyone for the public that wants to speak? Seeing none. Moving on to D, consideration of a draft financial plan for the period 2022 through 2024. City Manager.
Thank you. Good evening.
Perfect timing.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our newest members of the Finance Advisory Committee. Can you hear me all right? I'm going to have to be doing this tonight, but if I'm occupying too much of the time over here, just let me know. So we've got an hour tonight to sift through a fairly long exposition of where we are and where we might be and some things we might want to think about together before we get there. And I'm going to kick this off. I want to thank really all my executive team for helping me put this together, but particularly Carrie Dittman, who is our new finance director, and Carrie's going to play an active role tonight. We've got a PowerPoint for you. See what, professional finance direction brings. And I'm going to kick it off, and then Carrie will fill in some key points in the general operating side, and then she's going to kick it back to me for the capital side, and then we're going to all talk about policy considerations. Yes, sir.
Just a point of order, just in case. Did I need a motion and a second to discuss this consideration first, or are we good? Nope, I'm seeing none. Okay, perfect.
We're okay, yeah.
Keep rolling.
Yeah. So that's how I propose the format tonight. We're going to try to finish our opening and overtures by no later than 5:30 so we can have some good conversation. And if at any time you want to interrupt, or if something is not clear, or if I'm not speaking loud enough, or something's wrong with the PowerPoint, please do. Okay, so let's jump in the Wayback Machine, not that way back. And when we were talking about the FY22 budget for the newest members of the committee, I think you're aware that our fiscal year now runs with a calendar year. So that would have put us in November, and in December, I was making a proposal for the new fiscal year with the caveat that only exogenous things that we don't know about could throw a big wrench in the works. And so now, what's been going on in the last couple of months? We had what we thought seems pretty tame now, a little bit of inflation that was crawling into all sectors of the national economy and the world economy. And now we're on the edge of war in Europe. So stay tuned. There are things that could shake us yet this year. But we're going to proceed on some of the general assumptions that we've been working on for the last couple of years, which is that we ought to keep as best we can to a certain amount of fiscal prudence. We're going to continue to build on the economic development that has happily flowered in our community here in the last 3 years in particular. And we're going to try to be prescient about the future. We're going to look forward. We're going to plan some years in advance, and that brings us to where I started. So we've got a 3-year financial plan here. One other thing. In the policy considerations, you saw some references to what we might do with other local taxing bodies and talking about tax policy. First ours, and then also what their tax policy might be. What kind of impacts do they foresee coming forward? Which has an effect on what we do in terms of economic development. That's our job. as you know, we still don't have the final EAV numbers for our city and all the other taxing bodies, which means we don't know exactly what the rates are going to be. And we should get all that information in about 30 days. Tax bills come out the end of April, early part of May at the latest. So it's just about 30 days away. But that means that what we're talking about tonight is the best guess. It's pretty close, we think, but there can be surprises. That's one thing. Another thing is we just closed the city's books on FY21 just a week ago, or not even a week ago. Friday? Was it Friday? Yeah. And the auditors may gin up a few more things that we need to change, but generally now we're just beginning to see what, or we will soon see what the end of the year numbers were. So that's a little bit still hazy, not too bad. And finally, the mayor and I and the council have directed us to consider very strongly, go around to our partners in the other taxing bodies and to have a conversation, just a honest, arms open conversation about what we're all doing together or separately to impose tax on our residents and businesses. And is there some relief that might be possible if we work together? And to do that, all this information has to flow. So I foresee this evening, you may see it differently, as an opener. There's going to be some refreshing that's going to have to be done to bring truer data to fore. And even with that all done, there may be some more refreshing of data and numbers as we meet with other taxing bodies going forward. And ultimately, maybe by midsummer, peace in Europe, peace in our time, and we'll have a better idea of what might be shaking us from afar. Okay, so your financial plan. I hope it's logical in its organization for persons who have not much knowledge about the city or how the city works, what makes it run, the economic fuel. There's some demographics in the front, and we're not going to belabor all those. We're going to also not belabor the benchmarking exercise we went through. Hopefully you've had a chance to read that, and if you have any questions, please throw them out as we get a little further into this discussion. What makes the difference to our local residents and businesses is how we operate as a city government. This is what people mostly think of as the city when they look at our orange trucks driving around and our police and our fire. That's what they connect with. So we're going to jump into operations to start. I'm going to introduce Carrie, who's got a PowerPoint for you. We're not going to read through everything. We're going to dance through it, and please stop Carrie or throw something at me, and we'll answer your questions. We're going to go through that, and then she's going to give the wand back to me, and I'm going to hit some capital concerns and also some suggestions. Here.
Thank you, Bill, for the introduction. Welcome, members of the City Council and the Finance Advisory Committee. I'm Carrie Dittman. I'm the new Finance Director, starting my third month on the job now, and I'm very excited to dive into the city's numbers officially and kind of take a look back, as Bill noted, as what was going on at the time that the budget was put together for FY22, what has evolved in the last few months, and to kind of get feedback as to where we're going to be headed when we propose the next FY23 budget later on in the summer and the fall. So I'm a numbers person. I apologize in advance, but I wanted to pull out some of the key numbers of the budget, kind of at a high level, and starting with key revenues. And it's a little bit small, so I apologize for the size of the font. But starting with general fund revenues. As you might imagine, our property tax base, that's our most stable revenue source of the city, and also our largest source. For FY22, which is that middle column of the slide, the city budgeted about $6.8 million in property taxes, which is roughly 16% of our overall general fund revenue budget. The next largest category just beneath that is our sales and use taxes, which is where the city's share of the 1% state sales tax which that is where that's budgeted at about 5.8 million, or roughly 13%. And also our home rule sales tax. That's the local 1.75% sales tax that the city has, which is about $7 million. The next most significant source is our state income tax, which is reported within our intergovernmental revenues line item. That's roughly $5.1 million, and that is a per capita based tax, which will be important when we talk on a few slides into the presentation. The remaining revenues are generally interspersed between other categories. And it's important to note that when this budget was put together, the assumptions for future increases for property taxes was based at 4.95% annually, and all other revenue sources were anticipated to grow at a rate of about 2.75%. That's something we just need to keep an eye on and revisit and refine as we enter the budget preparation process later this summer. On the last row before the total, you can see there's some yellow highlights. The key thing to note there, that's our line where we have our ARPA grant funds and our SAFER grant funds, as well as transfers into the general fund. And the ARPA and SAFER grants, as we'll talk about in a minute, are the two kind of one-time grants that the city was fortunate to receive, which has really helped to do a lot for the city. But those are one-time grants, and they'll be done after FY24. So to take a closer look at ARPA, or it's actually called the American Rescue Plan Act, we call it ARPA for short. It's a federal grant that was signed into law back in March of 2021 and allocated about $350 billion to state, local, and tribal governments. It's federal funding, and it's coming through the U.S. Treasury. The city is defined by them as a metropolitan city, so we actually receive our funding directly from the U.S. Treasury. And if you can see up there, the top line, the city's cut of that $350 billion is about $10.4 million, which is being paid in advance. We got our first installment last year, and we'll get another installment of roughly $5 million in a couple months from now. Some keys there is that we must be obligated by the end of 2024 and have to spend it all by 2026. Whatever we don't obligate and spend, we have to return. And because it's a federal grant, there's very specific spending requirements that the U.S. Treasury has put out. Basically, there's 66 subcategories that I will not go into detail on, but those are the major kind of subcategories of public health, negative economic impacts, and so on and so forth, that our spending has to be within one of those categories. Interestingly, revenue replacement was a category that the U.S. Treasury said was okay to spend in. And initially, with their interim rule, they had a very complicated formula that cities had to come up with to determine what the revenue replacement loss factor was, which on the initial calculation, DeKalb was about 4.4 million. They got a lot of comments from local governments, and when they issued their final rule, they kind of scrapped that whole calculation and said $10 million is our revenue replacement number. So you can essentially spend up to $10 million on any governmental purpose, with the exception of a few categories. No lump sum payments to a pension fund, so there's no bailout of any pension funds, no debt service, no legal settlements, and no contributions to a rainy day fund. The city, when they were notified they were going to receive this grant, took a very hard look at all of the different categories and where the money could best be spent. Essentially, in fiscal year 2021, the categories of rehiring public safety personnel, which is money going back to the general fund, was about 1.5 million. The Hunter Hillcrest property was purchased to do future redevelopment on that land area. And as part of that, tenant relocation was included, so to assist the residential and commercial tenants to relocate. And then finally, we were able to give payments directly to other units of local government that did not receive ARPA funds. So the city has spent about $291,000 to the Kishwaukee Water Reclamation District and DeKalb Park District to assist them. The remainder of the funds for the next 3 years have been allocated, or earmarked, I should say, but not yet spent, including about $1 million for water lead service lines. That's actually a topic of the city council later this evening. The very bottom right-hand corner, right down here, if you can see that, That amount of $1.4 million is what has not been allocated or earmarked for any purposes as of this point. Taking another kind of look at this, of the $10 million award, you can see that $291,000 and $1 million of lead service line replacement. Those were specific categories that were noted by the Treasury, which leaves us essentially with about 9.1 million. And as I mentioned, that revenue replacement number was a flat up to 10. So going forward, any essentially revenue that we're going to spend out of this grant can be through that $9.1 million revenue replacement, of which, like I mentioned, we've got some of it already spent and then about $6 million more to spend in the future. Now, the other major grant that the city was awarded this year was the SAFER grant, otherwise known as the Staffing for Adequate Fire and Emergency Response grant. This is another federal grant that's coming through FEMA, and the city was awarded about $2.7 million. Unlike the ARPA, this is paid on a reimbursement basis, so the city has to actually incur the expenditures first before obtaining reimbursement, which the expenditures on this program start in February of 2022 for a 3-year period. Expenditures are going to be reimbursed to the city for the base salary and partial benefits of the 9 new firefighters that were hired between fall of 2021 and February of 2022. As you can see, in each year, there's roughly between $850,000 and $961,000 each year that the city is going to recoup through this grant program. This is, again, a 3-year grant, though, so beginning in 2025, something to keep in mind, as those salaries continue, the city is going to need about $1 million in additional revenues annually to keep pace with those new hires. Moving on to property taxes to consider. As I mentioned earlier, property taxes are generally the city's most stable revenue source and currently the most significant. Since 2014, the city's property taxes have only been used to pay a partial amount of the police and fire contributions for their pensions. However, no other city services are funded by property taxes. As you can see in the, or maybe can't see exactly in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th columns, the city is projecting our EAV to grow exponentially over the next several years due to all the new development that's coming online. And with that, the city has actually been decreasing our tax rate every year. So even though the EAV is going up, the rate is going down, our levy is slightly increasing each year. So we're actually getting more property taxes, and residents and businesses are paying less.
Hey, Carrie, real quick, since we have a couple new Finance Advisory Commission members, if I recall, the property tax the property tax money that we receive in full goes towards the fire and police pension gap that we have. But also, isn't there another almost $500,000 or more than $500,000 out of the general fund that also goes towards the police and fire pension?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
That is the next slide.
Next slide.
So as the mayor just noted, even though we're throwing the entire amount of the property tax levy at the police and fire pension contribution, there's still every year a shortage between what the the annual required contribution, or actuarial required contribution is, and what we're actually levying for. And this gap, this shortage, is going to continue to grow because of the fact that we're increasing property taxes by a rate of about 4.95% of those levies. However, the pension contributions are growing at a rate between 10 and about 14% for the pension funds.
Can I jump in here real quick?
Sure.
Carrie's been on board for about 3 months, and it's not an overstatement to say that to her horror, she recognized what she's just described. And I think to carry that a little bit further, and Tom and Lynn and I were talking earlier, what's the name of that movie, Little Shop of Horrors? Any of you familiar with that? The plant that starts as a nice, cute little plant in a quart jar eventually fills the room, and it gobbles and it never stops eating. That's what the beast is right now. It has to do with how the debt is amortized, or the obligation is amortized, downstate as part of the state pension but it affects us mightily every year, and it's eating all of our property tax and now eating our sales and use taxes every year. And if it continues unabated without any effort downstate, we're in difficult trouble in about 3 or 4 years. What we've done, happily, with the development that we've seen in the last couple of years, and what that's done for our EAV, is to buy some time. And that's terrific, but time runs out if there aren't other actors to make a difference for us.
We might understand it a little better if you could sing a few, bars of it. Little Shop of Horrors. Sorry, continue, Carrie. Couldn't resist.
Thank you.
So thank you, and thank you, Bill. To Bill's point, there's, unfortunately, the largest piece of this is benefits, and the city has no control over it. That's all set by state statute. And the second largest portion of this is investment returns, which we also have no control over. Formerly, that was administered by local pension boards, so our city fire and city police pension boards. However, now legislation has passed where they're all being centralized downstate. So there'll be one massive police board and one massive fire board that will handle all the investments, with hopefully the result of better investment returns, statewide for all the funds. But in the meantime, there's not much we can do except to keep, funding 100% of the actuary's contribution each year, which just keeps getting higher. And the last general fund revenue that is one of our major sources just to keep a watch on that I mentioned earlier is our income tax. So if you know or have heard, after the 2020 census was certified, the city's population went from about 44,000, actually dropped to about 40,290, which directly is impacted by this revenue source as it's distributed by the state on a per capita basis. So now our share is going to go down commensurate with that drop in population. However, the good news is, because the budget was conservatively budgeted, even the drop in population that we didn't know about when the budget was passed, we're still at a level that we should be able to meet or exceed for the fiscal year of 2022. But again, just something to kind of keep in mind going forward, since now we reset our population, and until the next census, or if we do a special census as a result of annexations or something along those lines, that's going to be our per capita share. That is my revenue highlights section. Now, if I'll throw it back to Bill for
Thank you.
capital.
Any questions at this point? No? Okay, let's jump into the infrastructure and some of the challenges we have and some options we may have to address the fiscal challenges among them. So in the background, those of you who've been through the last couple of budget years know that we are struggling, although not as much as maybe 2017, 2018, in coming up with enough money on an annual basis to keep ahead of the street repair costs that mount every year. We're on the verge. In fact, probably Andy Rice in the back, he can probably attest to the fact that today and for the next couple of weeks, even though we have road postings, we're going to see a lot of explosion of asphalt in particularly some of our residential streets, which aren't built to the same structure, and we'll need to repair them, or at least top them, or do something with them. Our annual repair cost is just to keep pace with that kind of seasonal ebb and flow should be around $3 million. We're at 2.2 roughly now, and just a few years ago we were only at about $750,000. So we've made progress, and we've done some mighty things. If you look around the town, and 1st and 7th look remarkably better, and Taylor Street, and some of parts of Tilton Park, and this year it'll be parts of the Knolls and 13th and 14th Street, and we're spreading it as much as we can, but we're still fighting a battle that we're not gaining on. And how do we get there? And so part of the challenge that I've laid out, or we've laid out in this this plan is to get from here to wherever there is. Now, how do we know when one street needs to be repaired over another, aside from our own anecdotal feelings about it? Typically, in a more scientific way, cities do something called a pavement condition index. And we usually get help from the state of Illinois to do that, and we're going to get some help, but it's going to be something that's going to go through the second part of this year. I think if all goes well, we're getting some money through our Metropolitan Planning Organization, which is called DSATS, is the acronym. DeKalb Sycamore, what's that? Area, I always forget what the A stands for, Transportation Study. And that was the title that we had when we were first organizing it, and we couldn't come up with a better title, I guess. We need to have a better title, so it makes some sense. But in any case, we'll get some federal money through that MPO, and that is going to help us with that pavement condition index. So this time next year, we'll have a pretty accurate, up-to-date ranking of what the index is. But that's only part of it. Identifying the problem is part of it, and solving it is another. So what do we do to gain some of that ground? Because we're trying to get to 5:30 and let you have some conversation, I'm going to run through this pretty quickly. We have identified, and on some of our slides here, so we have approximately, pause, there we go. See that 600,000? So if we could get to about 2.8 million, that would be just at the bottom range of where we need to be to try to keep pace. And then in our fleet, which I'll get to after I talk about the streets, we need another $235,000 roughly, or $215,000 in a year, just to, again, kind of keep pace with the deterioration. And we have a couple of options that we are presenting to you tonight for conversation.
I think it's the middle one.
Yeah, I was trying to. Oh, now we're going backward. Oh, really? All right.
Yeah.
There it goes.
You got your handouts with you? So what are they? On the property tax side, well, as Carrie has elaborated for you, we don't have property tax to throw at street repair, or for that matter, fleet replacement. Another option, and we've tonight on the agenda got an item relating to this, and that is the cannabis tax. So currently, we don't have an operating dispensary in town, but a couple of years ago, the council revised some earlier guidance to identify areas in town where dispensaries could be established. If you've been following this process over the last year or so, you know that the courts right now have taken up and will determine at what point we can proceed with the actual issuance of further state licenses. There are local licenses that have been identified, and there's some zoning decisions made by municipalities such as our own. Right now, we have 2 locations that are proposed and have been identified as sites that we'd like to see cannabis dispensaries at. It happens, and we're only guessing here because we're trying to compare ourselves with communities to the east that have had some established dispensaries. We might gain anywhere from $250,000, maybe $350,000, maybe $400,000 from each of these dispensaries in a year's time. It could be in the low end, could be in the high end. We just don't know. We have an untested market here. We are thinking that it should work. And in our region, the state divided the state legislature divided our state into regions. We have some pretty low population counties. It's sort of a pie slice that goes north and west from where we are. It does not include Winnebago County. And we would be one of the most populous of those counties. We can only have 3 total dispensaries in that 8-county area. But it's something that by previous council action, we could have up to 5 or 6 but we're only get, maximum we could get by state law is 3. If we get 2, that would just about close the gap in terms of the street financing needs that we have. Just throw that out. A lot of places look at increasing their gas tax. We did that a couple of years ago. The state of Illinois literally doubled their gas tax from 19 to 38 cents roughly. We're at 9.5 cents, and of course there's federal tax on top of that. We are not recommending that. If we increased, if we put another cent per gallon on the gasoline you buy at the pump, and by the way, it's by the gallon, not by the price, whatever the price is, it's the gallons pumped that the tax is applied against. We would generate about 135,000. If all other things being equal, I think we're, for a variety of reasons, there may be some diminishing returns if we increase it much more in the current climate, so I don't think that's going to generate much of an increase at all. On our horizon is the possibility of some more federal assistance. You're familiar with the Infrastructure Act, or the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which was approved earlier in the Biden administration, and that will ultimately generate for us the possibility of about 949,000 roughly. And that's all good, except it's going to be dispensed differently than the ARPA Act monies are. In other words, we don't just get the money and then identify needs to be addressed that are consistent with what the Act said they should be. In this case, it's competitive, and we have to apply, and it's in grant form. So there's no guarantee that we will get all that money. We have to find one or multiple grants that we can apply for, and up to that amount of $948,850. There is some additional money for transit, but that's not right now on the table. So that will probably be available to us next year. So we should be able to cover that shortfall next year, but this year, particularly since we're within literally about a month or so of going to bid on our street maintenance contract, is probably not early enough and not in our hands. Some communities have increased their overall sales tax. If they have a local sales tax, we are not recommending that. It doesn't seem to be the right environment if you're looking to reduce the tax burden on local residents and businesses, and you're increasing the home rule sales tax. And the home rule sales tax is a regressive tax too. And then the conditions we have, particularly as there's higher inflation, substantially higher inflation, again, it's not recommended by, at least by our staff at this point. So what do we have? The total of what we have is, if you look over to the far right, we're not recommending any new property tax allocations for the streets. Cannabis tax, yes, and it's possible that we could get as much as $250,000 to $400,000. Gas tax, no. We don't know, but we're fairly certain we will hit our mark, but it'll probably be next year with the infrastructure grant monies. And home rule sales tax, we're not recommending that at this time. So we think that we can make progress on the annual street maintenance budget. We'll do our best this year to hit our mark. It's no surprise to you that we're very anxious about what the pricing is going to be. The price of oil has gone up. The $2.2 million is what we have for a pretty ambitious summer street program. I don't know how much that's going to buy us, but we've got it, and hopefully we do pretty well. We have a little bit of slack, but not a lot. We have monies. We have been stockpiling for some major bridge repair next year. North First Street Bridge at the middle school and the Lucinda Bridge over by campus, and both are substantially funded by federal sources, and there's some local share too through state motor fuel tax, and we have to do those next year. So we have some engineering this year to do, but that's the biggest price next year. And that's where we are. Questions at this point? Okay.
You're at 535, just
What is it?
535,
Oh, boy.
just letting you know.
Okay, let me just jump ahead then. Let's get into some of the policy considerations, if you're okay with that. It's all right? Any questions? Taxes, I mentioned, I already laid out the caveat, which is that we don't know for sure what some of the 2021 rates and EAVs are going to be. But what we have done in the plan, as Carrie mentioned, is to project over the next 2 fiscal years a continuation of what we did this year and last year, which is to increase our levy by about 4.95%, just under the 5% threshold. With the AV rising, we can still gain some increase in our levy, which helps, but it all goes into the pension costs. There is another thing that I think we'll come back to as we begin to think about levy options for this year, and that would be, as we see what's happening with the other taxing bodies, the handout that I gave you it didn't make it to prime time because I conjured this over the weekend. But I've been reluctant to do this. I've been thinking, and we've all been on the same page up to this point, that to be leaders and to be accepted as leaders in tax reform, that we ought to be willing to lower our rate along with what others are doing. And I've been married to that, but I'm also a realist, and I see what's happening with our property tax and how it could be used not only in the operating side, or it could be used maybe to more powerfully offset some of the pension increases, so that other shifts can be made in revenue towards operations and services. And so what I've done here is to show we're at 0.97 now. That's our rate. We started quite a lot higher than that a couple of years ago, but we've been coming down each of the last 4 years. If we flatline the rate, then look at the bottom table. And I've compared what the plan suggests is our process, where we would continue to levy 4.95% more each year for the next 3 years. But if we aimed to create a levy and had pretty accurate assumptions about the AV, and that levy would result in no increase or no decrease, increase or decrease in our city rate, we would make, in an annual basis over the next 3 years, a little extra money on the property tax. We have an argument to make that the city has tried to find a plateau for now. It can go up or down from there. It's an annual process, and it's up to the council if we see that others are struggling to bring theirs down. But I think we can count on increasing EAV. I think that's the benefit we have right now that we haven't had in a long time, in substantial ways, as you said, exponential. And I hope, knock on wood, that remains the case for some time. So that's something to think about. We won't have time to debate the numbers substantially tonight, but I think there's another option. So you have the option of flatlining the city's tax rate for a few years and gaining a little bit more, or continuing to fall. I don't think we want to see the rate rise, and that's something we can calculate as the levy season begins. So, anything you want to add before we fail? Okay.
And one point of clarification for me, if we increase the city levy by the 4.95 that we were projecting, you mentioned that the pension, the police and fire pension was going up, if I remember right, Carrie, between 10 and 14%.
Yeah.
If we actually went where we flattened the city's tax rate, that puts us then, our tax rate, or the levy, raising about 10 to 14%. I'm doing math on the fly here.
Yeah.
So if we keep our property tax rate flat, there is the potential that we might be able to meet the increased pension obligations via that increase? or
We'll
come
still
close?
fall short, but not as much.
Yeah.
And we'll cut into that. So we won't change the ramp, but the impact on us, we'll have a little more ready money to offset that. That's the best I can foresee until or unless there's changes downstate, as Carrie and I have said a number of times.
Questions, comments?
So the little shop of horrors sleeps for a little bit. It's about.
So you want to open it up? What do you want to do at this point?
Sure.
Alderman Burbick.
Great work to you and your team. Wonderful asking feedback along the way, and I think this is a great way to approach it, so thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Especially the part about no recommendations on raising taxes to fund. That was a nice addition for sure. Mr. Tarazinski?
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, it's a major step forward just to be here talking about the future rather than emergencies about what we can't fund. Seeing our operations funded, and we're building fund balance to meet policy. So those are all extremely positive. The whole levy question, I think, is something the FFAC, when we had the budget meetings in November, we talked about how sensitive the long-term projection was when we're adding 18 people. We have a lot of one-time money, federal monies, one-time $10 million. The safer thing, nobody knows how long those monies are going to last. So to build a projection, I think is very appropriate at this time to be doing this and see how sensitive that longer range number is, even beyond 24, because we're still into that $10 million. As to the levy, I think the council's been very prudent about not raising a dollar amount of taxes on existing homeowners for a number of years. And that has been a prudent in these tough times to do it that way. And I think there would be options. I think this one here is an option worth considering because of the pension obligation growing at a faster rate than property taxes could possibly grow at without new construction. But new construction is material, and if we capture all the new construction, it would be something worth penciling out as to just that increment, how much more that would provide us, because I think it would be at least the numbers on here, if not greater. So I think that's worth pursuing, and I think you could still drop your, I think the rate would naturally drop because houses are going up at 8 or 9% a year right now. In many parts of the state and the country, much greater, 15 to 20%. So your rate's going to drop 20% if you're not going to get $1 extra, right? So the rate is going to drop just from the algebra of inflated house values. So that's a plus to those wanting to drive that overall rate down. And that's partially true of the school district as well, because they're capped. They can't go beyond the higher of 5% of CPI. CPI may grow 5% this year, but they can't go beyond that. And housing values would be beyond that. So their rate would naturally drop without additional things that they probably can do. So I look forward to dealing with and having an opportunity to discuss that and work on that through this summer and fall. And just want to thank Lynn for our 2 additional members who can share the love and fun that we all enjoy in doing this.
My pleasure. So,
Mayor, I might point out, and thank you, Tom, I look forward to working with you on that, too. If you look on pages 48 and 49 of your plan, you'll see a little exercise that we have done the last couple of years, which I would like to see other taxing bodies do, where, as Tom was suggesting, you look at, actually, these are real numbers based on a real house in DeKalb. And we are looking at what happens with such things as homestead credits and multipliers and so forth. It's not enough just to talk about what you think the levy is and what the rate is. To look at what the dollar impact is on individual homeowners, you have to go a little deeper, and that's what this is about. And we'll put this on the table. I think sometimes there are taxing bodies that will think, well, we did it, we're going down, it's going to be good, and we can brag about it. And then you get your bill, and wait a minute, I'm paying $40 more to that taxing body. And I think you have to go this far, and we'll probably talk about that as we go along, too. It's important.
I love how you put that, though. It's, you know, Bill and I are planning to go to the various taxing bodies and with open arms, just trying to figure out collectively how can we as a community drive our aggregate tax rate down. Because as you mentioned in the financial plan, we're at 11.5%, rough number. Sycamore's 9.5%, rough number. And other competing communities are in the 8.5% range. So we've still got a ways to go to get ourselves where we are more competitive. And I'm hoping many of the other taxing bodies, and I would anticipate they will, see that logic behind reduction of tax rate from affordable housing perspective meets that or is a path towards that objective. But then also it makes us more competitive, which should bring more home ownership, bring more business to our community, which drives more property tax revenue. So that's going to be a great conversation going to each of the taxing bodies to see what their ability is, because we don't know how they operate, we don't know their challenges, but hopefully all of us taxing bodies can come together collectively and work together to drive that tax rate down to the benefit of the taxpayer.
Mayor.
Alderman Burke.
And I think what we'll find is that the different taxing bodies have different needs. So, you know, while we're looking at our approach, and again, we mentioned earlier our population declined by 9%. Well, over the same period, the school district enrollment went up 12%. So I think that it's tough to look at this broadly across all taxing bodies to think, oh, we can all make this work out together better, because I think we'll find out that they each have different needs that maybe were not expected.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was getting at. But hopefully with the insane amount of new AAV that's been brought to the community, which the city of DeKalb is responsible for trying to drive new AAV, that those additional dollars will be taken into consideration in those plans. But yes, we definitely don't know the individual issues of each taxing body, but I think it's important that we start having those conversations and just bringing it up, making sure that we're all aware, and if we collectively we can get it down to a competitive tax rate, that again, that's going to generate more revenue. It's a long-term play to solve any short-term issues that might be out there. Alderwoman Morse. Oh. Alderman Perkins, did you have yours? Oh. I'm going to have to, I'm going to start sitting on the corner because then I can see everybody. How about finance?
Just an observation. We've talked a lot about pensions, and we've talked about the levy, and we talked about the resultant rate. Every year we've had the conversation about how it gets in and so forth. Only because I had this in the basement shelf, I look back at the first year's CAFR that I had for the pension obligation. And that was like 09. That's all 09. Anyway, you dig that out and you look at that, and our unfunded pension liability for police and fire, $32 million, unfunded in 09. I dug it out for 20, and since 9 to 20, 12 years have elapsed, and we've been on the schedule to meet all the requirements to build our base to 90% in year 2040. The rule has been in place, and we've met every year of obligation and made the funding as required. So our $32 million, did it decline? It jumped to $90 million. So our obligation and debt has climbed while we've made every payment on time and on schedule. A lot of things happened in those times. Some great turbulence in housing, the housing crash of 08, 09. Life expectancies grew, Return on investment went down. We lost years of return. Look at the stock market this morning, and it's not looking good this year. But think about that. It went from 32 million to 90 million. We've made every allocation. So it behooves us to not lose that and make sure that we really take a hard look at that property tax for purposes of how to capture the new construction, new growth, and see if we can tackle that through that means while we have this great opportunity without necessarily adding anything to the existing homeowner. That would be a great outcome.
I think it does show, though, that there's no way the city of DeKalb or other municipalities that are faced with the same sort of deficit are going to be able to shoulder that burden on their own.
No.
The state legislature is going to have to make some changes to that model. Otherwise, they just bankrupt every community in the state by going down the similar path.
In the past, they've kicked it down the road, right? They kicked the
Yep.
can down the road, they've added more years, they may do something along those lines, because I don't think there's any magic to the formula of how it pays out. But higher levels of housing values may help us as far as keeping the tax rate
Yep.
constant or down while we're trying to make progress on this.
Mhm.
Absolutely agree with what you said, but then there's another ingredient too. So we thought for a long while, 15, 20 years, we could maybe just skin by with the same level of bodies, lives, shall we say, even with all these other things happening with those already on the books. But we reached a point where we determined that we couldn't do that. Like in the fireside a year and a half ago, we decided that the 2-on-2 was not working. I personally saw it. In fact, when I came back here, I was appalled to see that we're still using the system that I set up in the 90s, where we took a bet, a great bet, every time that the units left the barn, that with 2 on an engine and 2 on an ambulance, both vehicles would arrive at the fire at the same time, and we'd have 4, and we'd put it out. The problem was we were having so many ambulance calls that we arrived with 2, which isn't enough to do anything. It was a little bit like the Three Stooges are here, and they're not stooges. So we had lots of talk about that. And on the police side, we were also lower there, and then we found, partly because of a certain landlord, that we were just overwhelmed. We just couldn't do certain things without having a few more bodies. So we have added bodies, which also adds to, just from a numbers standpoint, the overall annual cost. But then there's a certain expectation of service that we have to meet too. So it's that balancing act that every year we have to come up with. We've held the line on administrative costs and other things so that we can provide the frontline service that I think we need. And so that's another thing. Every year when we do the budget, we look at that and we think about where we are. As you look at the, one last thought on that point, as you look in the plan at our benchmark communities, we're somewhere in the middle of the pack now. We were at the way on the bottom, now we're about in the middle, and that's about where we're plateaued for a while, and then we'll see. But as Tom pointed out, as you look at the unfunded costs, it's extraordinary. It's hard to imagine. It's like looking at your mortgage, oh, I don't really owe that much. Yeah, you really do. Maybe you could, we can't sell. We can't sell enough property. We don't have, we've sold most of our property now, so we don't have much to sell.
Anything else? So quick summary, we're still waiting on final numbers to plug in here, have final plan
Final numbers,
completed.
we'll be refreshing this over the next couple of months. When we reconvene after the audit of the 21 fiscal year, we'll be in a much better shape to make some policy decisions about the next couple of years, and we look forward to that. We'll serve it up for you a little tighter, a little sharper, and but we want to give you a run at it. Some of this is not new at all. Some of it is a refinement of earlier numbers.
And a summary highlight, if we can come up with $800,000 in new revenue, that would not cause us to have to raise taxes to meet the projected plan of what we would like to accomplish.
All other things.
Yep.
stay the same.
Yeah. Okay, beautiful. All right, if there's nothing else, I would take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. Moved by Alderwoman Larson, seconded by Alderman Perkins. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Nay, same sign. We're adjourned.
Do I have to adjourn us? I have to adjourn us, Ruth?
Yeah.
What?
Okay. Do I hear,
Oh, okay, well, go for it.
do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Thank you. Is there a second? Thank you. Thank you very much.
Now, Ruth, technically, do we need to adjourn again, or are we good?
You don't have,
No,
All
they
right,
do.
all right, good.
we'd have to vote.
All right.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Abstentions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Finance,
Thank
really
you.
appreciate it.